What would you do if saving a life cost you everything you've ever known? Picture yourself standing on the deck of a weathered fishing boat, the salty tang of the ocean stinging your lips, the rhythmic creak of the hull beneath your feet, and the endless horizon stretching before you. For 62-year-old Samuel Carter, a humble fisherman from the quiet coastal town of Crescent Bay, this wasn't a question. It was a reality that shattered his world. On a crisp morning, as the sun cast golden rays across the Atlantic, Samuel's hands, rough from decades of hauling nets, gripped the helm of his beloved boat, the Eleanor Dawn, named after his late daughter who'd left this world too soon. 5 miles offshore, the sea whispered secrets of its depths, but today, it screamed for help, a cry that would change Samuel's life forever. Samuel had lived by the ocean's unwritten rules his entire life, a solitary man who found solace in its vast, untamed beauty. His private dock, a hard-earned privilege in Crescent Bay, granted him freedom from the bustling commercial harbor, a sanctuary where he could escape the world's noise. But as he scanned the horizon, his weathered eyes squinting against the glare, he spotted a man thrashing weakly 80 yards away, his arms flailing in a desperate dance with death. "Hold on," Samuel bellowed, his voice swallowed by the wind, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. Imagine you're Samuel now, the adrenaline surging through your veins, the cold Atlantic beckoning below. Do you dive in to save this stranger, risking your own life in the icy waves? Or do you hesitate, sensing the unknown trouble he might bring? Share your choice in the comments below. Option 1. Dive in, or Option 2. Hesitate, and let's see what you do in Samuel's shoes. While you're at it, hit that like button and subscribe to daily narrated stories for more gripping tales that pull you right into the heart of the action, where every decision could mean life or loss. The morning had started like any other for Samuel Carter, a ritual as familiar as the tides. Seagulls screeched overhead, their cries a sharp contrast to the rhythmic lapping of waves against the hull of the Eleanor Dawn. At 62, Samuel's body bore the scars of a life at sea. His hands calloused, his back stooped from years of labor. But the ocean was his sanctuary, the boat a living memory of his late daughter, Eleanor, who'd passed from illness 2 decades ago. Her name, painted in faded blue letters on the bow, was a quiet reminder of why he endured the grueling work. The sun climbed higher, its golden light shimmering on the water, when a faint cry shattered the stillness, a sound so raw it pierced Samuel's soul. He froze, his weathered hands gripping a rope, the salty breeze carrying the desperate plea. "Help! Somebody please!" Shielding his eyes against the glare, he spotted the figure, arms flailing, head barely above the choppy waves, a silhouette of pure desperation against the endless blue. Without a second thought, Samuel secured his gear, his fingers trembling as he tied down the nets, and steered toward the man, the engine of the Eleanor Dawn roaring with a purpose that drowned out the pounding of his heart. As he closed the distance, Samuel's breath caught in his throat, the reality of the situation sinking in like a stone. The man's dark clothing, soaked and heavy, dragged him under with each wave, his movements sluggish, his strength fading fast, as if the ocean itself was claiming him. Samuel tossed a life preserver, its bright orange circle bobbing on the water like a beacon of hope, but the stranger couldn't reach it, his fingers clawing at the surface in a futile dance with death, the waves swallowing his efforts. Time was slipping away, each second stretching into an eternity of dread, the weight of the decision pressing against Samuel's chest. Kicking off his boots, he shed his heavy jacket, the cold air biting into his skin like 1,000 tiny needles, sending a shiver down his spine. With a deep, shuddering breath, he dove into the Atlantic, the icy shock stealing his breath and sending a jolt of panic through his limbs, the water's embrace a cruel reminder of its power. His powerful strokes, honed by a lifetime of swimming these treacherous waters, propelled him forward, each movement a battle against the numbing cold, his muscles burning with the effort. Reaching the man, Samuel wrapped an arm around his chest, feeling the stranger's limp weight against him, the faint rise and fall of his chest a fragile thread of hope amidst the chaos. The swim back to the boat was grueling, the waves crashing against him like an angry tide, testing his resolve with every stroke. Finally, he heaved the man onto the deck, collapsing beside him, his own chest heaving with exhaustion as seawater dripped from his soaked clothes, pooling on the weathered wood beneath him. The stranger was barely alive, his breath shallow and ragged, his pale face a haunting mask of near death, the blue tinge of his lips a stark contrast to the gray of his skin. Samuel's hands trembled as he knelt beside him, the coarse texture of the blanket rough against his calloused fingers as he wrapped it around the man's shivering form, the fabric a meager shield against the cold. Performing first aid with a practiced calm he didn't feel, Samuel pressed his ear to the stranger's chest, the faint heartbeat a lifeline in the chaos, a whisper of life that fueled his determination. Setting course for shore, his mind raced with questions, each one a wave crashing against the shore of his sanity. Who was this man? Why the terror in his eyes? What had he stumbled into by pulling him from the sea? Halfway back, the man's eyes fluttered open, panic flashing across his face as he registered the unfamiliar boat and the rugged fisherman hovering over him. The creak of the deck beneath them a jarring reminder of his reality. "Easy, you're safe," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the unease coiling in his gut like a tightening knot, the warmth of his words a stark contrast to the chill in the air. The man's voice was a hoarse whisper, each word dripping with urgency, as if speaking might cost him his life. "Don't tell anyone I was here." Before Samuel could press him, the stranger slipped back into unconsciousness, his head lolling to the side, leaving Samuel with a haunting plea that echoed in his mind. Samuel's heart pounded as he weighed his options, the hum of the Eleanor Dawn's engine filling the silence, a steady rhythm that did little to calm his nerves. Every instinct screamed to take the man to the public harbor, to summon help and let the authorities handle whatever trouble this stranger carried. But that haunted plea lingered, a warning he couldn't ignore. A bead of sweat trickled down his brow despite the cold, his mind flashing to his late daughter, Eleanor's laughter, her bright eyes, the way she'd always believed in doing what was right. Would she have wanted him to turn away from someone in need? Against his better judgment, he steered toward his private dock, the boat cutting through the waves with a heavy silence that mirrored the dread settling in his chest like a lead weight. What had he just dragged into his quiet, unassuming life? The question gnawed at him, a persistent tide eroding his sense of peace. The next morning, Samuel awoke with a groan, his muscles protesting the previous day's exertion, the ache a cruel reminder of his heroic plunge into the icy depths. He shuffled to the guest room where he'd left the stranger, the wooden floor creaking under his weight, each step a reminder of the life he'd built in Crescent Bay. But the bed was empty, the borrowed clothes folded neatly on a chair like a ghost had tidied up, the creases in the fabric a silent testament to the stranger's presence. A faint damp spot on the pillow was the only proof anyone had been there, a silent taunt to Samuel's growing unease, the air thick with the scent of salt water and mystery. "Hello," Samuel called, his voice echoing through the small house as he checked the bathroom and living room, the stillness amplifying his isolation, the walls seeming to close in with each unanswered call. Nothing. The man had vanished without a word, leaving behind a void filled with unanswered questions, a shadow that stretched across Samuel's once simple life. By mid-morning, Samuel headed into town for supplies, the unease gnawing at him like a persistent tide, his boots heavy on the gravel path as he walked. At Larson's general store, the usual chatter fell silent as he stepped inside, the air thick with unspoken tension, the scent of fresh bread and coffee doing little to ease the atmosphere. Clara, the shopkeeper who'd known him for decades and often shared stories over coffee, busied herself with a shelf, her hands trembling as she rearranged canned goods, avoiding his gaze as if he carried a contagion. "Morning, Clara," Samuel said, grabbing a basket, his voice carrying a forced lightness that felt hollow even to him. "Morning," she mumbled, her eyes darting away like a frightened bird, her fingers fumbling with a can of peas. As Samuel gathered his items, he overheard whispers from the next aisle, the hushed tones of two local fishermen, Tom and Eddie, cutting through the quiet like a knife. "Saw him bring someone in yesterday, fancy clothes, half-drowned, shouldn't get involved," they muttered, their words laced with fear, their voices low but carrying the weight of suspicion. Samuel rounded the corner, his voice sharp with frustration, the basket in his hand feeling heavier than it should. "Get involved in what?" The men froze, Tom stammering. "Nothing, Samuel, just talk." His face flushing with guilt, while Eddie shifted uncomfortably, his boots scuffing the wooden floor, the sound a grating reminder of the town's unease. "Funny kind of nothing that makes everyone shut up when I walk in." Samuel pressed, his patience thinning, the weight of their silence pressing against his chest like a storm cloud. Eddie cleared his throat, his eyes flicking to the door as if seeking an escape, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "Look, Samuel, small town. People saw you with that stranger. They're just curious, is all," he said, his voice strained, the lie evident in the way his hands fidgeted with his cap. Samuel's jaw tightened, the sting of betrayal cutting deeper than he'd expected, a wound that bled into his sense of belonging. "He was drowning. I saved him. That's the story," he said, his voice firm but laced with a tremor of doubt, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. But the tension in the air was suffocating, and Eddie's excuse about the tide, laughably weak given it wouldn't peak for hours, only fueled Samuel's growing suspicion, the whispers lingering like a fog over the town. Outside, Samuel's gaze landed on a black SUV parked across the street, its tinted windows hiding two men in dark suits, their presence a looming shadow over his once peaceful town. One raised a camera, the click of the shutter snapping photos of him, each sound a nail in the coffin of his privacy, and a shiver ran down Samuel's spine, the coastal breeze suddenly feeling like a cold breath of danger. All day, the town's atmosphere was heavy with suspicion, a palpable shift that mirrored the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, the sky darkening as if reflecting Crescent Bay's mood. At the hardware store, the clerk fumbled with a wrench, avoiding eye contact, his hands shaking as he muttered about inventory. At the post office, the line parted like the Red Sea as Samuel approached, the townsfolk's whispers following him like a shadow. Even at the diner where Samuel had eaten every Wednesday for 20 years, the waitresses who once greeted him with smiles now busied themselves with trays, their glances fleeting, their voices hushed. By evening, he returned home, his irritation boiling over into a quiet rage, the black SUV following at a discreet distance, appearing and disappearing like a phantom, its presence a constant reminder of the eyes watching his every move. As he unloaded his supplies, the crunch of gravel announced Sheriff Paul Evans' arrival, the sheriff's truck kicking up dust as it rolled to a stop. "Evening, Samuel," Paul said, lingering by his vehicle, his hat in hand. A gesture Samuel recognized as a shield against bad news, the brim worn from years of nervous handling. Samuel nodded toward the SUV, his voice edged with sarcasm. "You know about my new friends?" Paul sighed, his weathered face creasing with discomfort, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Heard about your excitement yesterday. Some agencies are asking questions about your visitor. Best if you don't mention him for a while," he said, his tone heavy with regret, his eyes avoiding Samuel's gaze. "Agencies? What agencies?" Samuel demanded, his voice rising with a mix of fear and defiance, the weight of the unknown pressing against his ribs, making it hard to breathe. The man nearly drowned. Paul sighed again, deeper this time, his shoulders slumping under the burden of secrets he couldn't share. "Can't say more. Just keep your head down," he advised, his voice a plea, before driving off into the fading light, leaving Samuel alone with his confusion. That evening, a soft knock at the back door startled Samuel, the sound reverberating through the quiet house like a gunshot, his heart leaping into his throat. No one used that in trance but him, and the knife he grabbed felt cold and heavy in his hand as he approached cautiously, the blade glinting in the dim light. Peering through the window, he saw young Billy Harper, 13, his small frame hunched with nervousness, his eyes darting over his shoulder as if pursued by shadows. "Mr. Larson at the post office told me to give you this," Billy whispered, shoving an envelope into Samuel's hands, his voice trembling, his breath visible in the chilly air. "Said it's important, and I shouldn't tell anyone." Before Samuel could ask more, Billy bolted into the dusk, his footsteps fading into the gathering darkness, leaving Samuel clutching the envelope like a lifeline. The unmarked envelope felt heavy in Samuel's hands, the paper rough against his fingertips as he sliced it open with the knife still clutched in his grip, the sound of tearing paper echoing his frayed nerves. Inside was a typed note, the black ink stark against the white page. Forget what you saw. Say nothing. The words sent a chill through him, the message pulsing with menace, a cold realization settling in his gut like a stone sinking to the ocean floor. This wasn't just a rescue gone wrong. This was something bigger, something dangerous, a web he'd unwittingly tangled himself in, its threads tightening around him with every passing moment. The next day, Samuel sought answers at town hall, his boots echoing on the polished floor as he approached the receptionist, Maggie, who'd baked him cookies just last month, her warm smile now replaced by a nervous twitch, her fingers fidgeting with a pen. "Mayor Daniels is busy, Samuel. Maybe next week," she said, her voice tight, her eyes darting to the side as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. "It's urgent, Maggie." "5 minutes," Samuel insisted, his tone edged with desperation, his hands clenched at his sides. After a tense wait, her expression grim, she returned, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mayor says he can't help. Told me to tell you to mind your own business." Walking home, Samuel felt the weight of unseen eyes on his back, the familiar streets of Crescent Bay now a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, the cobblestones slick with the morning dew, each step a reminder of the life he'd lost. What had he stumbled into? For 3 days, he tried to maintain his routine, the rhythmic cast of his fishing net a futile attempt to reclaim normalcy, but the black SUV's constant presence made it impossible, its dark silhouette a harbinger of dread. He began checking his windows before turning on lights, the soft glow casting eerie patterns on the walls, keeping his curtains drawn, a stark contrast to the transparent life he'd lived, a man who'd once left his doors unlocked and his heart open. The isolation gnawed at him, a silent companion to his growing paranoia, the once welcoming town now a prison of whispers and averted gazes. At dawn on the 4th day, Samuel packed his fishing gear, craving the sea's comforting rhythm, the scent of salt and promise of balm to his frayed nerves, the crisp air a reminder of simpler times. But as he approached his dock, his heart sank like a stone dropped into the deep, the sight before him a dagger to his soul. Official vehicles swarmed his private pier, yellow tape fluttering in the breeze, a barrier between him and his livelihood, the bright color a cruel mockery of the life he'd built. Coast Guard officers moved with purpose, their uniforms stark against the weathered wood, photographing his boat, the Eleanor Dawn, with clinical detachment, their voices a low hum of authority. "What the hell?" Samuel muttered, quickening his pace, his boots crunching on the gravel path, each step fueled by a mix of anger and dread, his fishing gear suddenly feeling like a burden. An officer stepped forward, hand raised, his voice firm and unyielding. "Sir, this is a restricted area. Turn around." Samuel pointed past them, his voice trembling with a raw edge of fury, his fingers shaking as he gestured to his boat. "That's my boat, my dock. What's going on?" The officer's expression was a mask of authority, his eyes cold and distant. "Your name, sir?" "Samuel Carter. I've owned this pier for 35 years. I'm going fishing," Samuel replied, his voice cracking under the strain, his chest tight with the injustice of it all. The officer spoke into his radio, the static crackling in the air, and a tall woman in a commander's uniform approached, her presence commanding silence, her boots clicking on the wooden planks with a precision that unnerved him. "Mr. Carter, I'm Commander Elise Monroe with the Coast Guard. This dock is temporarily sealed for a federal investigation," she said, her voice clipped, devoid of warmth, her gaze piercing through him. Samuel stared at her, disbelief morphing into a raging inferno within him, the heat rising from his chest to his cheeks, his hands clenching into fists. "Investigation of what? I haven't done anything wrong." Commander Monroe's voice remained cold, her posture rigid. "All maritime activities from this location are suspended indefinitely. Any attempt to bypass this order will result in arrest." Samuel's face burned, the heat a physical manifestation of his anger, his voice rising with each word. "This is my livelihood. You can't shut me down without an explanation. I deserve to know what I'm being accused of." Monroe's gaze was unyielding, her eyes narrowing slightly, a flicker of something, contempt, perhaps, crossing her face. "You know what this is about, don't you, Mr. Carter?" "No, I don't," Samuel shouted, his voice cracking with frustration, drawing eyes from the other officers like moths to a flame, their stares a weight he couldn't shake. All I did was save a drowning man. Since when is that a crime? For a fleeting moment, something flickered in Monroe's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or a hint of sympathy, but it vanished like a wisp of smoke, replaced by her stoic mask. Your compliance is appreciated. We'll contact you when the investigation concludes, she said, turning away with a dismissive flick of her wrist, her back a wall between Samuel and the truth. And when will that be? Samuel called after her, his voice echoing across the pier, a desperate plea lost in the wind. But she didn't answer, her silhouette merging with the group of officers huddled near his boat, their movements methodical, their purpose shrouded in mystery. He stood there, fishing gear in hand, the weight of the injustice hitting him like a physical blow, his shoulders slumping under the burden of 35 years of honest work reduced to nothing, his sanctuary stolen in an instant. A young officer passed by, his head lowered, muttering under his breath, the words a dagger to Samuel's heart. Next time, don't rescue strangers. The words confirmed Samuel's growing suspicion. This wasn't random. This was retaliation, a calculated punishment for an act of kindness, a betrayal that cut deeper than the ocean's depths. Fury surged through him, hot and sharp, burning away the despair, his resolve hardening like the steel of his fishing hooks. Samuel spun around, marching back toward Monroe, his boots pounding the ground with determination, each step a declaration of defiance. "This is about the man I saved, isn't it?" he demanded, his voice loud enough to carry across the pier, a challenge thrown into the wind, the salt air carrying his words to every ear. "I did what any decent person would do." He was drowning. Officers paused, their discomfort evident in the way they shifted their weight, their faces betraying a flicker of unease, the tension palpable. Monroe strode back, her expression stormy, her jaw set, her eyes flashing with a warning. "Mr. Carter, leave now," she hissed, her voice low and menacing, her presence a storm cloud over the pier. "Tell me why I'm being punished for saving a life." Samuel insisted, his chest heaving with a mix of rage and righteousness, his hands trembling at his sides. For a moment, the scene froze, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing down on them both, the air thick with tension, the waves crashing against the pier a distant roar. Monroe leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear, her voice a whisper that carried the weight of a threat. "This isn't personal, Carter. It's national security. Go home. National security." The words hit Samuel like a bucket of ice water, freezing the fire in his veins, his mind reeling with the implications, his breath catching in his throat. What had he stumbled into? A covert operation, a government cover-up, a conspiracy that stretched far beyond Crescent Bay? Two officers escorted him away, their hands firm but not rough, their silence a wall between him and the truth, their footsteps a steady rhythm on the gravel path. At the perimeter, they stepped aside, leaving Samuel to trudge back up the path toward town, his boots heavy with defeat, the yellow tape fluttering behind him a cruel reminder of his loss. His dock, his sanctuary, was now forbidden territory, the place where he'd found peace for 35 years stolen from him. The sea's song now a mournful dirge. One act of basic human decency had made him an enemy of his own government, a label that stung more than the cold Atlantic ever could, a wound that bled into his very soul. Back home, Samuel paced his small living room, the walls closing in with each step, the creak of the floorboards a mournful echo of his turmoil, the scent of salt water clinging to his clothes a reminder of what he'd lost. 3 days passed since the blockade, his boat still impounded, his livelihood dangling by a thread, each day a battle against the despair that threatened to drown him. The injustice burned within him, a flame that refused to be extinguished, fanned by the memory of the stranger's terrified eyes, the plea that had started it all. Desperate for answers, Samuel muttered, "To hell with this," grabbing his jacket with a resolve that felt both reckless and necessary, the fabric rough against his skin as he shrugged it on. He headed to the library, the musty scent of old books greeting him as he stepped inside, a stark contrast to the salty air he craved. Mrs. Ellis, the librarian who'd known him since he was a boy, glanced up nervously, her hands pausing over a stack of returns, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored his own. "Just need a computer, Helen," Samuel said, forcing a casual tone, though his voice trembled slightly, the weight of his mission heavy on his shoulders. She nodded, her eyes darting toward the window, her voice a whisper. "Third one down, 30 minutes only," she said, her fear a tangible presence in the room. Samuel sat at the ancient desktop, the keys clacking under his fingers as he began his search, the glow of the screen casting shadows across his face. Drowning man military, missing naval officers, secret operations Atlantic coast. The screen filled with news articles about training accidents and routine patrols, each click a dead end that deepened his frustration, his fingers tightening on the mouse. He tried recent unexplained events eastern seaboard, still nothing significant, just vague reports that offered no solace, the words blurring as his hope waned. As his allotted time dwindled, desperation set in, his heart pounding as he wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, the library's silence amplifying his anxiety. One last search, classified military personnel missing, yielded an archived article from 18 months ago, the headline a beacon in the darkness. Naval intelligence officer presumed dead after training exercise. Samuel's breath caught in his throat as he clicked the link, the grainy photo loading slowly on the flickering screen, each pixel a step closer to the truth. The man in the dress uniform, clean-shaven with deep-set eyes and a strong jaw, stared back at him, his military posture a stark contrast to the desperation Samuel had seen in the water. Despite the formal attire, Samuel recognized him instantly. It was the man he'd saved, the stranger who'd haunted his dreams, his face now tied to a name, Commander Nathaniel Blake. "But he's not dead," Samuel whispered, his voice a mix of awe and dread, the realization sinking into his bones, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of the desk. According to the article, Blake had vanished during a classified operation off the Virginia coast, declared dead after a failed search, leaving behind a wife and son, his legacy reduced to a posthumous medal for extraordinary service. "He was in my house," Samuel murmured, the words a confession to the empty room, the weight of the truth a burden he couldn't shake. Printing the article with trembling hands, Samuel left the library, the paper crinkling in his grip, his mind racing with possibilities, each step on the library's wooden floor a reminder of the path he'd chosen. Blake specialized in counterintelligence, foreign infiltration of domestic assets, a world of shadows and secrets far removed from Samuel's simple life. What was he doing here, alive and drowning miles from shore? Back home, Samuel pored over the article, the dim light of his lamp casting shadows across the page, the words swimming before his eyes as he searched for clues in the sparse details, each sentence a puzzle piece in a picture he couldn't why. etc. He found a business card from a reporter, Michael Reed, who'd visited Crescent Bay last summer to write about the fishing life, the card's edges worn from being tucked in a drawer for months. Samuel dialed the number, the ringtone a lifeline in his isolation, his heart pounding as he waited for an answer. Coastal Chronicle, Reed speaking. The voice on the other end said, sharp and professional. "Mr. Reed, this is Samuel Carter from Crescent Bay. We spoke last year about." Reed's voice sharpened with interest, cutting him off. "Samuel Carter? The fisherman whose dock was seized by the Coast Guard?" Samuel's pulse quickened, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest, the reporter's words a lifeline in the darkness. "You know about that?" Rumors spread fast. Military presence in a fishing town raises eyebrows. "What's going on?" Before Samuel could answer, a sharp click interrupted, followed by 3 beeps and dead silence. The sound of death knelled to his hope. Samuel stared at his phone, disbelief turning to a cold dread that seeped into his bones, his hands trembling as he gripped the device. He tried redialing. Nothing. He called from his neighbor's phone, then his cell. Same result. Each failed attempt a nail in the coffin of his hope, the silence on the other end a wall he couldn't breach. "They're blocking my calls," Samuel realized aloud, his voice echoing in the empty room, a chill spreading through his body like a winter fog, the realization a weight on his shoulders. Someone was watching, actively silencing him, their reach extending into the very lines that connected him to the outside world, a suffocating grip he couldn't escape. That night, sleep eluded him, his mind a battlefield of fear and resolve. the shadows on his ceiling dancing with every flicker of the streetlight outside. He sat by his window, the glass cold against his forehead, watching the black SUV down the street, its dome light flickering as the occupants checked their dashboard, their silhouettes a constant reminder of his captivity, a prison of his own making. By morning, Samuel had made a decision, his resolve hardening like the steel of his fishing hooks, his jaw set with determination. He would drive to the Chronicle's office, a 3-hour journey to the next county, a pilgrimage for the truth he couldn't find in Crescent Bay. They couldn't stop him from speaking face to face, from breaking free of this suffocating silence, from reclaiming the life they'd stolen. As he stepped onto his porch, the mail carrier arrived unusually early, the crunch of his footsteps on the gravel a jarring intrusion, his hurried movements a sign of unease. "Special delivery, Samuel," he said, handing over a plain white envelope before hurrying off, his eyes avoiding Samuel's, his pace quickening as if fleeing a storm. No return address, no postmark, just a blank slate of menace, the envelope a harbinger of dread. Samuel tore it open, the paper tearing with a sound that mirrored the ripping of his peace, feeling the weight of unseen eyes watching from somewhere nearby, their presence a shadow he couldn't shake. Inside was a typed note, the words a dagger to his heart. "Stop looking. Don't make us remind you again." Beneath these words, a photograph made his blood run cold. His brother's house in Augusta, 250 miles away. In the foreground, his niece and nephew played in the yard, their innocent laughter captured by a lens that threatened their safety, their small figures unaware of the danger lurking in the frame. The message was unmistakable. "We can reach anyone you care about." Samuel sank onto his porch steps, the paper trembling in his hands, the weight of their threat crushing his spirit, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the innocent lives he'd sworn to protect, the family he'd give anything to keep safe. For a week, Samuel kept to himself, the town's suspicious glances and the ever-present surveillance a constant companion to his solitude, each day a battle against the despair that threatened to consume him. His boat remained impounded, his livelihood suspended, the silence of his home a stark contrast to the bustling life he'd once known, the walls echoing with the ghosts of his past. On the 8th morning, as he repaired his porch railing in a futile attempt to maintain normalcy, the rhythmic hammer strikes a hollow echo of his lost routine. The sound of tires on gravel drew his attention, the noise a jarring intrusion into his fragile peace. A sleek black sedan pulled up, not the menacing SUV, but an official vehicle with tinted windows, its presence a beacon of hope or doom, the polished exterior reflecting the morning sun. Samuel set down his hammer, a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest, his fingers still gripping the tool as if it could shield him from what was to come. The rear door opened, and a figure emerged, tall and straight-backed, dressed in the crisp uniform of a naval intelligence officer, medals gleaming like stars against the dark fabric, his cap tucked precisely under his arm. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. It was him, the man he'd saved, transformed from a desperate, drowning stranger into a commanding presence, his posture a testament to the life he'd reclaimed. "Mr. Carter," the man said, extending a hand, his voice steady and authoritative, the words carrying a weight Samuel couldn't ignore. "We meet again, under better circumstances." Samuel hesitated, the memory of that icy rescue flashing through his mind, the cold water, the stranger's limp weight, the plea that had started it all. He accepted the handshake, the man's grip firm yet warm, a bridge between their worlds. "Commander Blake, I presume. The papers say you're dead," Samuel said, his voice laced with a mix of suspicion and relief, the words a challenge and a question rolled into one. A faint smile crossed Blake's face, a crack in his stoic facade, his eyes softening with a hint of gratitude. "Reports of my death were necessary," he admitted, his expression growing serious, the weight of his words hanging between them like a storm cloud. "I'm here to thank you. Had you not pulled me from the water, a 4-year deep cover operation would have failed, and countless lives would have been lost. Men, women, children caught in a web I can't fully disclose, a mission that demanded my silence, even at the cost of your peace." Samuel studied him, anger simmering beneath the surface, his eyes narrowing as he recalled the pain of the past week. They seized my boat, turned my town against me, threatened my family. Was that necessary too? He asked, his voice cracking with the pain of betrayal. The memory of his niece and nephew's innocent faces in that photograph, a wound that wouldn't heal. Blake's eyes softened with genuine regret, the lines on his face deepening, his shoulders slumping slightly under the burden of his role. Those actions were taken without my knowledge or approval. By the time I was debriefed and learned what you'd endured, the isolation, the threats, the betrayal, the damage was done. I fought to intervene, to spare you this ordeal, argued late into the night with superiors who saw you as a liability, but my hands were tied by bureaucracy. I'm here now to make it right, he said, his voice low and earnest, the sincerity in his tone a balm to Samuel's wounded spirit. Blake reached into his jacket, withdrawing an envelope with a slow, deliberate motion, the paper crinkling as he handed it over, the sound a promise of redemption. This doesn't compensate for your troubles, but it's a start, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his gratitude. Samuel opened the envelope with wary fingers, the legal documents inside revealing ownership papers for a new dock, 4 times the size of his old one, in a prime location 3 miles up the coast, along with a certificate of ownership for a brand new fishing vessel, its description promising a life beyond his wildest dreams, a vessel that could carry him into a future he'd never dared to imagine. I don't understand, Samuel said, stunned, his voice barely above a whisper, the weight of the gift overwhelming, his hands trembling as he held the papers. A token of gratitude from those who can't publicly acknowledge your contribution to national security, Blake explained, his tone carrying a hint of apology, his eyes searching Samuel's for forgiveness. The dock is yours, fully paid for. The boat as well, 40 feet of state-of-the-art equipment, a vessel to rival any in the fleet. Your name remains classified in our files. Nothing connects you to me or my mission, a secret you'll carry to protect the greater good. Blake gestured toward the road, his invitation a lifeline in the storm of Samuel's emotions. Would you like to see your new vessel? Still dazed, Samuel followed him to the car, the leather seats cool against his skin as they drove in silence to a secluded cove, the journey a quiet reprieve from the chaos, the hum of the engine a soothing contrast to the turmoil in his heart. There, a gleaming 45-foot fishing boat awaited, its hull reflecting the morning sun, the state-of-the-art equipment making the Eleanor Dawn look like a relic of the past, the polished wood a testament to the future that awaited him. On its bow, in bold green letters, was the name, Carter's Legacy, a tribute etched in paint, a name that carried the weight of his journey, his sacrifice, his redemption. She's yours, Blake said, watching Samuel's reaction, his eyes searching for approval, a faint smile tugging at his lips. With permits to fish in restricted areas, your catch should quadruple at minimum, a new beginning for a man who deserves it. Samuel ran his hand along the pristine hull, the smooth wood a stark contrast to his rough fingers, emotions warring within him, gratitude, anger, disbelief, a storm of feelings that threatened to overwhelm him. Why go to all this trouble? Samuel asked, his voice thick with emotion, his throat tight as he fought back tears. You could have just apologized. Blake met his gaze, his expression resolute, his voice steady. In my line of work, Mr. Carter, words mean little. Actions matter. You acted without hesitation to save me, risking your life for a stranger, a man you didn't know, a man who carried secrets that could have cost you everything. This is us returning that favor in kind. I fought for a more reasonable approach when you rescued me, argued late into the night with those who wanted to bury you in silence, but I lost that battle. I won this one, he said, his voice a mix of pride and regret, his hand extending once more in a gesture of gratitude. Thank you for saving my life. Few people will ever know what you really did for your country that day, but I will never forget. After Blake departed, Samuel stood on his new dock, the horizon stretching before him like a promise, the sea's rhythm a soothing balm to his wounded soul, the waves whispering a song of redemption. From persecuted victim to secret hero, his life had taken a strange, unpredictable turn, a journey etched in the salt and scars of his soul, a legacy that would live on in the name painted on his new vessel. The ocean, once a source of pain, now held the promise of a new beginning, a testament to the power of kindness in a world that often forgot its value. Samuel's journey reminds us that kindness can come with a heavy price, but it also holds the power to change lives in ways we can't imagine, a ripple that spreads far beyond the horizon. From the moment he dove into the icy Atlantic to save a stranger, Samuel faced betrayal, fear, and loss, his heart tested by a town that turned its back and a government that threatened his family, the very people he'd sworn to protect. Yet his courage and compassion were rewarded, not with fame, but with quiet gratitude that restored his livelihood and honored his sacrifice, a legacy etched in the name of his new vessel, Carter's legacy. This story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the strength of doing what's right, and the hope that even in our darkest moments, our actions ripple outward, touching lives we may never know. Have you ever faced consequences for doing the right thing, just like Samuel? Maybe you helped a stranger and regretted it. Or maybe it led to an unexpected blessing, a moment that changed your life in ways you never expected. Share your story in the comments below. Samuel's not alone, and we want to hear from you. To build a community of courage and compassion right here on Daily Narrated Stories, where every story matters, where every voice is heard. In a world that often overlooks selflessness, Samuel's tale shows us that true heroes don't seek rewards. They act because it's right, because the call of humanity is stronger than the fear of consequence. At Daily Narrated Stories, we bring you real, life-changing tales of justice, kindness, and resilience to inspire you every day, to remind you of the power you hold in your hands, in your heart. So don't miss out. Subscribe now and join our family of storytellers, where stories like Samuel's remind us of the light that shines even in the darkest storms. Time is fleeting, and the next incredible story is just a click away. Will you be there to witness it? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for Daily Narrated Stories. Don't let these powerful lessons slip away. Comment below with your thoughts on Samuel's journey, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that kindness can change the world. Act now, because the stories that matter most are waiting for you, and the time to join us is now.